In our mind,
Length,
crop
not the
factor
size,
also
crop
generally
factor.
holds true
Yeah.
for aperture and depth of field.
What?
Multiply the aperture by the crop factor
No,
and
no,
you'll get
no,
a reasonable
no! Don't
approximation
multiply the
of what
aperture.
that lens will
What
look
are you
like
talking about?
compared against a full
No!
frame.
Hi, my name is Leszek Lesner from the YouTube channel TechView Podcast, and I was listening to Some Gadget Guy, and I really like his videos, especially its camera reviews and so on. But at one point with this Vivo review, he is really wrong, and I heard it so many times, not only from him but from all the other YouTubers as well, that it just aperture and multiplying with crop factor is just plain wrong, and I will explain to you why that is. So let's get started. So let's first talk about what is the aperture. So the aperture is basically the little hole that if you have like here, I'm not so good at drawing, but this is like your camera lens, and then there's the blades that can open and close, and the hole is going wider. The wider it gets, the more background blur you can get when you have a subject, the more light can fall in, and the smaller it gets, the less light can fall in onto the sensor. So this is like going here to the sensor, and here I have a sensor which is like a big sensor, like a big S, might be APS-C, might be full frame, doesn't really matter. Let's call it full frame in this case, and I have like here my photo that I take from the sun, and maybe a tree and a person under the tree. So what changes when I have a smaller sensor is basically, first of all, this photo is taken in, and I get this on this sensor. I will get the sun as well. It is mirrored in this case, but doesn't really matter. What I will get is the same, so on this full frame. And when I have a smaller sensor, the only thing that I change basically, of course the lens gets a little bit smaller, but what I change is basically I crop in. This is why it's called crop sensor. And so this might be a smartphone sensor, small one, and it's just basically cropping in. So what does change here? Of course, the viewing field, what I see, is changing. So I crop in, but the aperture is not changing. Why should it change? The background blur is not changing. Why should it change? Doesn't really make sense, because I'm standing at the same position before where I took the photo. Then the only thing that changes is that I get a cropped in photo, a close-up shot basically. If I move backwards, then of course I get a depth of field change that looks different than what f2 here, let's say it f2, could be f4 in this case because it's so small, looks like. So if I have a smaller lens here, a smaller f4 opening as well, because it's f4, it stays f4. The opening doesn't change when I have a small sensor. It doesn't really care about the sensor. If the sensor is like a big sensor or a small cropped sensor, it doesn't really care. So this is why on light meters you can find the f-stop number, but you don't find sensor size. Otherwise on light meters I would have also have a sensor size if it would have any change there. So this doesn't really care if I have f4 here. f4 stays f4, so there's no difference when it comes to this. The only thing is the depth of field would change if I would want this picture here not to be this cropped in, but being this picture. Then I have to go a little bit backwards. And if I go a little bit backwards with my camera, of course f4 also doesn't change, but the look, to get this look here that full frame has, the same complete look, I have to step backwards, and therefore the depth of field becomes larger. So I get more in focus, less background focus, because I'm moving backwards. So the reason why the background blur changes is not because something happens here or the sensor becomes smaller, No, it is because I'm moving backwards here. That's the sole reason why I have a different background blur. So it is not wrong that smartphone manufacturers write f2 on their lenses, because it is f2. It's an f2 opening. And if I take this shot here with my Sony Xperia Pro I 1-inch size sensor and type 1-inch size sensor, and I take it with my APS-C camera from the same position, then I get a cropped in shot with f2. If I have the APS-C also has f2, a cropped in shot of the same scene, the same background blur. I get the same background blur, but just cropped in. You get it? So, and when I want to achieve the same field of view with my, or the same cut out, basically the same information of the photo, the same frame, with my 1-inch size sensor as the APS-C, I have to move backwards. And if I move backwards, of course, because it also stays f4, it's not going to, or f2, it's not going to f0.95 or something like this, then the background blur and the compression will change as well. So the thing is, adding crop factor to the aperture is wrong, because the blades, they are not changing. They are f4, f2, whatever you have. They are not changing at all. So it's not something you should apply to the aperture, the crop factor, because this is simply wrong, because physically it's not changing. Nothing is changing. There are many other factors that came into play. You have to step backwards, maybe even further backwards. The compression changes, the background compression changes, but even everything changes. If I step backwards, even if I would have then an even smaller f0.95 or something like this, I still, when I step so much backwards, still get a bit of different compression than when I'm standing here and doing the f4. So there is definitely a huge difference when it comes to this kind, and it has nothing to do with the aperture in itself, because it stays f4, and this is why it's correct not to apply the the crop factor onto the aperture. It does not make sense at all, and I hope I explained it well enough for you right now. If you have some questions still, you can write it down in the comment section. That's everything for this short little video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.